about environment and change matters. It's good to have you here. You are the finale, so there's no, don't forget the expectations usually I have on the end of the act, end of the show act. But we're grateful for you being here for the scrutiny of the budget that's been presented to us by Cabinet to obviously scrutinise. Welcome to Mark and Tom, who we're obviously very familiar with as their Cabinet leads. But also, if you guys could introduce yourselves, we can see your names, but just to refresh members what your role is in the council, that would be really helpful. Starting with Philip.
So if I start, I was going to check the time of the day. Good morning, everyone. Philip Robinson, Service Director for Street Services.
Hi, I'm Paul Barnard, the Service Director for Strategic Planning and Infrastructure.
Good morning, it's Phil Bellamy, Head of Highways.
Karim Hassan, I'm the Interim Strategic Director for Growth.
Joseph Lewis, Finance Support for the Growth Directorate.
And Ollie Woodhams, I'm Head of Finance and Deputy Section 151.
Thank you. And just behind Tom.
Hello, Philip Hesseltine, Head of Transport.
Jonathan Bell, Head of Spatial Planning, Sustainable Development.
Sorry, I just could have that on. So, for who, Tom or Mark, who won the toss? Okay, so Tom, I hand over you, Tom, to present, followed by Mark, and if others want to join in at that stage to add anything to what they say, that's fine, or we'll go straight into questions after that. Okay,
thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting us here to discuss our department's budgets today. As you'll know, Street Services is the largest department in the council with about 500 staff. The most costly element is our essential street scene and waste services at nearly £20 million, including waste and recycling collections, street cleansing and grounds. And like the Chair's just said, very visible services that our residents are very passionate about. Some areas, such as the garage, bring in sufficient income to essentially cover their expenditure. We've also been working with environmental planning to continue to drive up the accessing of external pots of grant funding to deliver exciting nature and community projects. Their income was less than £1 million in 2022, but we're forecasting a significant jump to well over £2 million next year, reflecting our ambition on nature recovery. We're also committed to getting the basics right, particularly when it comes to cleaner streets. I'm pleased to confirm that this budget represents the first time in living memory that the council will spend over £4 million revenue on street cleansing. Any debate around street services investment will understandably cover the kind of casework topics that fill our inboxes as councillors. I wanted to share some actual facts about what the investment has been delivering on the ground over the last 12 months. In 2024, our teams carried out around 6.5 million scheduled bin collections, and only 0.1% of residents reported that their bin wasn't collected on the scheduled day. Our playground inspectors carried out 4,075 comprehensive equipment inspections. Our crews emptied our 1,064 public litter bins over 141,000 times, an average 2.5 times per week. And sweeper vehicles covered 52,000 miles throughout 2024, collecting 2,500 tonnes of sweepings from Plymouth's streets. That being said, I've always been upfront about how street services is the most visible example of the impact of austerity on local government spending. Plymouth City Council was forced to cut a third of the ground's budget over that decade. Of course, that impacted the service delivery. The budget we inherited from the previous administration was inadequate to deliver these essential services, but we have been rebuilding it since then. Last year, we added an additional £300,000 for grass cutting, an area that had been struggling with low staff numbers. This budget seeks a much more ambitious £500,000 restructure to address more systemic issues. It will drive up performance in key areas and our recycling rate through the recruitment of recycling officers once again. Moving on to the net zero side of my portfolio, I wanted to start in a way that I hadn't intended by responding to a public comment from Councillor Finn yesterday, who described our £65 million capital programme for net zero as, and I quote, alarming. It's a shame he's not able to make it today, and I'll be happy to discuss that with him further. In my mind, the destruction that the climate emergency is having on the planet is what is actually alarming. But we also need to understand the wider positive opportunities this investment can bring to Plymouth's communities. Let's not forget that net zero means active, healthier travel. Net zero means cosier homes. It means cleaner air. Net zero means more resilient coastal communities. And very relevant to why we're here today, net zero also means council departments saving money on their energy bills. Every year, other council departments save around £500,000 from their expenditure because of energy efficiency improvements and renewable energy that we've helped to invest in. Councillor Finn suggested that money could be spent on something else. Much of the funding for these projects is external and ring-fenced. Since 2016, Plymouth City Council has secured nearly £500 million in external grants for net zero infrastructure and other projects. That's a record we should all be proud of on a cross-party basis. You can't redirect the Trees for Climate Fund to potholes or the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund on school transport. It's simply not allowed, and anyone who sits on audit and governance, I'm sure, should understand that. I'm proud of what this budget represents on the Council's commitment to our environment and our communities. From introducing food waste to starting to deliver major new heat networks. We've got an exciting year ahead. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Over to Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I, first of all, would like to pay tribute to the work that the officers from the council did in the emergencies that we had in the last year. I want to look back at last year, but for the highways team, the dedication of staff coming out in the middle of the night, volunteering to come out, I think is a credit to the ethos that the staff in this council portray, and I think it's worth saying that. I want to start by just rolling back 12 months and looking at what we've achieved. Times are difficult. We work really hard to improve the life of the people in Plymouth. And I just want to give you some examples of what we've managed to achieve this year. So with the rollout of the 510 Beryl e-bikes in the city has won national recognition in the Guardian newspaper as an exemplar for e-bike schemes in the country. I also want to pay tribute to yourself, Chair, and to Councillor Kevin Sproston as my champions for walking and cycling and bus, and for all the work that you both have done in meeting people, and you particularly, Chair, in meeting the Plymouth Cycling Campaign and feeding back their issues, and for Councillor Sproston for chairing the bus partnership with a selection of residents so that we can hear the feedback. I've also been working with the Peninsula Transport as now chair and the Department for Transport directly on strategic transport issues regarding rail and road in the region. During this year, we have secured just over £1 million of external funding for walking and cycling initiatives. We have funded over 2,100 bikeability training places for Year 5 and Year 6 children, putting Plymouth in the top 10 nationally. And through Bike It Plus, we work with 47 schools in the city on a number of cycling and walking initiatives. We also welcome the support of Active Travel England. Our social prescribing team has helped nearly 1,000 participants, and we have retained our level 2 status, which is really, really important. Our strategic program team is now, as you can see, putting in the first phase of the Woolwell to the George scheme and future plans with over £519 million, of which 82% is externally funded. The successful Transforming Cities programme comes to an end in a couple of months' time, and members will recall we secured a grant of £58.8 million that actually has levered in nearly 150 million in investment into our schemes. We are really proud of what we've done with our mobility hubs, St Budo Interchange, Mayflower Street bus improvements, and our nationally recognised workplace grants to local business. I am particularly pleased that we have achieved for local people who rely on public transport in the city during the year. I've made no secret of the fact that I am buses have been my top priority. We have also updated our real-time passenger information to 4G this year, which was long overdue, which gives more reliability and decent information. We have enhanced security measures through feedback at our Coypool Park and Ride site. On long-term plan for buses remains hugely ambitious. We've published our 2024 bus service improvement plan, and which sets out a total investment of both bus and infrastructure in the city over the years to nearly 311 million. Through the Sustainable Transport team, working closely with Citybus, Stagecoach and Cornwall Council, we secured 31.8 million for the investment which in electric buses, which I am sure we will go back to later in the meeting. We have also this year introduced 2 new bus routes. We returned the leisure bus to Bothersand, and also the reinstatement of a bus to communities in Manamead, Hartley Vale and Peveril, which was withdrawn under the last council. Our future programme of public transport investments is currently being developed following a detailed review of the bus service improvement plan, with the ambition being to deliver as many possible measures as we can. The programme, which will also be in place by the end of March, will be measured against our passenger priorities. Chair, during the meeting, I am hoping to be able to make some more announcements on that. Just briefly, because I know there's so much in my area, I could go on for hours. I just want to, just so members, some facts and figures about our highways department. So, for example, this year we have done pre-patching on 30 roads, surface dressing on 35, 55 road have been identified for our new initiative called Find and Fix. 12,000 metres of footway has been resurfaced. Over 4,500 defects on our road rectified. 100 de-energised bollard signs, saving 4 tonnes of CO2. 1,500 streetlight columns replaced. We've installed 5 new CCTV locations in public spaces to actually give more protection to the general public. We're actually in trial at the moment with providing CCTV cover for Saltash, so we want to break out and use additional income. And also, I think it's really worth saying that this goes sometimes unknown. The team have delivered over 530 children's pedestrian training in road safety. So we do a number of things in our departments that actually go under the radar. And sometimes I think we need to bring that out into the public, because we get kind of, why is my road in the state, or why is the traffic light not working? But actually we do a lot more in the community than we get credit for. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Coker. And I can tell how both proud you are of your portfolio roles as well, and which obviously impact not just the council's running, but the city's residents. Service directors, do you want to add something at this stage, or should we go straight to questions? Okay, so please raise your hand if you have a question to ask. And the first question is from Councillor Ricketts, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Councillor Briarsdale. I don't really know why you've come out like that about Councillor Finn's comments yesterday, because there is a well-held view by many people that net zero by 2030 is never going to happen. Everybody in this room knows that Plymouth, this country, the world will never be net zero by 2030. So by you coming in here, giving it beans as such, because somebody said it's alarming, it is alarming. Absolutely alarming. If you had said net zero 2050, 2060, that might be a more reasonable approach. But if Plymouth was to be net zero in 5 short years, we would be very cold, very poor, and I will not be voting for things that make my residents cold and poor. You have no consistency on this issue, okay, and no reality on what's achievable on this issue. Because you talk about net zero by 2030, and then the next thing you want to talk about is opening the airport. It's an absurdity.
We have a question,
And especially
please,
as all the
Councillor Ricketts.
councillors are driving petrol cars, it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So how can you justify Plymouth being net zero by 2030?
Thank you, Councillor Ricketts. I'll try not to give it beans again. You asked about 2030. This City Council, before I was elected, signed up unanimously to a climate emergency declaration in 2019. I'm assuming that was the period that you weren't elected, so you weren't able to vote on that. But across party, we agreed that the climate emergency is a real threat to this planet and to us in Plymouth, and that we need urgent action on that. The legally binding target is 2050, which is what the country is working towards. But what we said as a city is that actually we need urgent delivery on that as soon as possible. And so that the majority of the decarbonisation to have a real impact on global temperatures is needed in this decade between 2020 to 2030. So that's a really important motivating factor, not just to the work we do as a local authority, but also in terms of our partnerships. You mentioned that net zero will make people poor and cold. There are real opportunities in terms of retrofitting, for instance, to do the opposite of that. If people have relatively small retrofitting tweaks to their homes, it can cause huge savings in terms of their energy bills. And actually there are opportunities, for instance, with the new heat network to more efficiently warm properties than they are at the moment. You mentioned about there being widespread concern about the alarming rate of net zero. Every single year we bring an ambitious net zero action plan to the council. There's an opportunity to debate that. I've encouraged councillors from different groups to come and inform that process. I'm looking forward to doing that with different representatives again this week. You were the only councillor to not vote in favour of the Net Zero Action Plan last year. So if you have views on that topic, you have a right to express that. But I'm very happy to reassert that that is not the view of Plymouth City Council, and I'm glad it's not the view of most of the groups on this council either.
Just to follow up, how can you, with authority, give us action plans that will not achieve net zero in Plymouth by 2030, and then support the opening of the airport? How is that consistent, that you want the airport opened and you've got the departments within this administration working hard to get the airport opened, but you want net zero by 2030? You have no credibility to talk about net zero by 2030.
Can I just say that the airport doesn't come into this, so because that's a policy decision of the council, policy matter, unless Councillor Brydell, have you got something to say about that? But there's no obligation to do that because it is not the brief.
So the airport does not fall within my portfolio, but it's important to note that with every aspect of the council, there are a range of priorities. Environmental priorities, economic priorities, priorities around how we look after children, look after our streets. Sometimes those priorities complement each other well. Sometimes there's a difficult balance on that. We will be continuing to publish our net zero action plans and how we perform against that. Last year, for instance, we reached about 80% of our commitments and delivered on that. We transparently looked at every single one where we were progressing on track or weren't doing so. That will continue to be the place, and we'll also be looking at wider roadmaps towards net zero as well. But the important thing is that we continue to deliver decarbonisation as much as we can within this decade.
Thank you. With ambition as well. That's what's clear.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry. I do apologise.
Sorry.
It's not here. Sorry, Councillor Freeman. My fault. Sorry.
I didn't mind. I have a couple of questions, both for Councillor Coker and Councillor Brydell. So if I just do one now and then come back, yeah? Okay, no problem. So with the upcoming food waste collection service, obviously that requires a significant amount of funding, and I am making an assumption here from the paperwork that we're not going to get all of that funding from government to meet all those costs. So how is the rest of that going to be met, please?
So I've been really excited about food waste delivery. It was really clear when we started this administration that Plymouth City Council was behind other local authorities, including in the southwest, and that we needed to match their rate of progress on it. We had various delays on clarification from national government for years, and the previous government made lots of promises, lots of talk about food waste, and it was essentially up to local authorities to foot the bill. And so local authorities that did so 5 years ago, for instance, were doing that by their own borrowing exclusively. Plymouth City Council is now in a position with a new Labour government in that the vast majority of the capital costs for food waste has been covered by central government, so I really welcome that. We've received, we've put on our capital programme about £2.3 million, which will cover the cost of 10 vehicles and all of the bins required for that. Of that 2.3 million, it was approximately 80% that was nationally funded. So, I feel that we're in a much better situation than some other local authorities who did that slightly earlier than we are. That only covers the capital side of it. So officers are currently working on a business case which will relate to the revenue costs. Obviously, we're going to have to hire new staff in order to accommodate that. And I've also suggested that this is an item which comes back to scrutiny next year so that we can continue to release the information as it's available, not just on the revenue costs, but also in terms of the phasing and the introduction of the delivery itself.
Can I ask, is that phasing across the city within a calendar year or financial year, or will it be over a longer period?
So we haven't yet finalised the detail of the introduction. It will be hopefully in a short period of time, but rather than us doing it all at once, we think it's important just to make sure that we test it out initially on a smaller geographical area, just to make sure we can tease out any issues that might come with this being a new service. Anything you want to add on that, Philip?
If I may, I think just to add to Councillor Brydell's comments about this being an exciting step change in the way we collect and dispose of waste. Food waste will see a significant change in residents' approach to waste collection. It will drive up our recycling, but it will also make people think differently about their waste streams, such as we're currently experiencing in Wales, for instance, where they've been doing this for a number of years. So answering your question slightly differently, Councillor Freeman. I think over time, there will be a lot of adjusting because we expect the waste tonnages to reduce over time as people get used to recycling food and actually waste less food. We'll also see in time, hopefully, a move to 3 weekly collections. So I think the net improvement over a period of 4 or 5 years will see our tonnages reduce and our reliance on moving vehicles around the city lessen as well. The hope is to roll it out as quickly as we can, but as Councillor Bryansdale said, we want to phase it in to get people used to the idea that this is a separate waste. But it's an exciting time. There's a lot of hard work involved, a lot of moving parts, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And what about the implication of businesses who provide food, restaurants, cafes and so on, takeaways? Do they, it probably have an impact on how much they produce?
So we already offer a commercial food waste collection. So businesses, private companies can do that anyway, and we obviously collect food waste for schools as well. Because it's a commercial offer, they can go anywhere. We offer what I think is a good service there.
Councillor Blight, please.
Thank you. In last year's budget, Councillor Bryansdale, you talked just now about the additional 300,000 for grass cutting. Has there been a review of the impact of that? And was that a one-off expenditure, or is that now part of the planned programme going forward?
Thank you, Councillor. It's a good question because obviously the budget papers primarily narrate changes, and I'm really pleased that 300 is now our kind of normal way of working. So that's helped to right-size the grounds budget. In terms of what that's achieved, so over the last year, that's significantly increased our staffing on the ground. So the number of permanent ground operatives in the grass cutting team has shot up, which has made it much easier for us to get to wider places across the city. Obviously, it takes a little bit of time to bed in the training of those new individuals, and so we're hoping for further opportunities to improve on the performance next year. I identified 2 priorities with the team around grass cutting last year. One of which was around play parks. We had some feedback which, as a dad with a young family myself, it's really disappointing to hear of young children last year struggling to get to the swings and needing that area to play in. And so we set up a separate play park grass cutting team, which has been incredibly effective. The other area that I asked them to prioritise on was on kind of busy junctions and roads, particularly at roundabouts and junctions. So to give you some stats on that, so it's not just bluster, on high-risk roads, based on the budget we inherited previously, there were 3 cuts in 2023 across the grass cutting estate on that part. In 2024 last year, that rose to 7, so we more than doubled the number of cuts that those road vergers received. The play parks team were even more efficient than I think we'd hoped or expected. So it was 6 cuts to play parks in 2023. 2024 last year, that increased to 15 cuts. So there were substantial performance impacts that came from that 300,000 investment. What I'd like to see that investment continue to improve is the areas that are down as the regular grass cut across the city, which is a much larger parcel of land than those 2 topics. So it's harder to bring that percentage up overall, but it's something we're continuing to target. We've also made capital investments as well, so in equipment which is better suited to cutting longer grass, and that's made a difference too. And we've got further opportunities which I'll be speaking about in the next couple of months around what we do in terms of beautifying roundabouts as well, more flower planting that will sit alongside the keeping streets tidy aspect of grass cutting too. Thanks.
Thank you. And did the increased grass cutting programme result in fewer complaints or requests from the public?
I don't have that data to hand. I don't know if Philip's aware of it. We have the the feedback data from across street services in terms of on different topics is actually lower than some councillors might expect. On weeds, for instance, we get very few correspondence around that as a topic. But Philip, I don't know if you're aware of any particular
It would be
figures
very
off the
easy
cuff?
if we say, yes, it has. I mean, the complaints have reduced. I'm not necessarily convinced that's as a result of those changes. What I would say is the additional funding is incredibly welcome. It will go to where it's needed. And as Councillor Bryansdale has said, I think the opportunity to invest in new technologies will see the changes really hit home this coming year. Thanks, Chair.
I think it'll be really useful, knowing you get the leaflet sent out to us, those of us who live in the city with your community tax demand, council tax, whatever, for that to be flagged up as well, because it's a key area that affects those with or without gardens, and but everyone uses the environment and, you know, the street scenes and so on, so it'd be good to flag up to see what residents have had for their buck. Councillor Allison, please.
Thank you. I'm going to be a pain. I've got two as well, please. The first one is for Mark. The government recently announced that they were going to give us £4 million extra for bus services across the city. Can you tell us what steps have been taken and how that's going to improve service?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's worth saying that that is the biggest investment we've had in Plymouth for a very long time. I again pay tribute to both the government and to our public transport team, who've engaged fully with the Department for Transport's bus team to actually raise Plymouth's profile. What we're analysing at the moment, what we're going to spend that money on, but I can confirm today that we have listened to councillors from Plymstock that have raised constantly with me the issue of providing a cross-link between Plymstock and Plympton. We've actually managed, and we will be announcing later today the full details, but we've been able to invest that in a cross-bus service that will operate between Plymstock Broadway and Plympton the Ridgeway. In fact, it's going to be two buses, one covering directly through the area around Drake and the crematorium. And also we've listened to feedback from residents that Councillor Stevens, Councillor I can't pronounce his surname, from Plymstock, and Councillor Lawson have been saying about change of the bus route into Sherford to enable Sherford residents to get to Plympton, and that bus will actually, those rerouting will be done. We're also looking at additional evening and weekend services on a variety of routes throughout the city. And I think it's worth saying, for the first time, we have been able to protect every single non-commercial route in the city. So when I took this 2 years ago, I pledged that I would not cut bus services. This has enabled us to have the best increase possible in bus services, that we've responded to the needs through our bus improvement panel to be able to deliver, and also to maintain the access for people to go to the waterfront at Bothersand during the summer. So this is really great news for Plymouth.
It's great news for me to hear as well. It was a really great one. I'm looking forward to singing Wheels on the Bus go round and round. And obviously there's an appeal to all residents here in the city to make sure that the buses are used, because if they're not used, they run the risk of losing it. So
yeah, what I would say is, when we reintroduced the bus for the parts of the city under the old 31 route, we actually gave councillors a use it and lose it leaflet, and I'm pleased to say that that's actually made about 20% difference to the number of people that are using it. So on these new routes, the same offer will be there for councillors representing those areas to actually go out and say to residents, you've been asking for this, well, you know, because you've been asking for it, that actually now we've done it on a 12-month trial period, we need you to use it and support it. Simple.
Support the bus and the ambition for carbon emissions reduction as well at the same time. Excellent. That's good news. Councillor Allison, do you have a follow-up to that?
No, but I do have a second question, but unrelated. Yeah.
Murphy, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. Can I ask them both at the same time or no?
If they're linked, only if they're linked.
Well, they're both about buses and showers and stuff.
They're linked, that's an omnibus. Go.
Oh, very good.
Mark, this is for you. How cost effective is the new bus shelter contract, and how much will the savings be to the city? And when will this? When we will see when will we see this being achieved? I'm going to ask the next question as well at the same time, just to get it in. We've invested a lot of money in the electric bus fleet, along with Plymouth City Bus and Cornwall CC. Can you tell me how many of the 50 or so that will be arriving will be utilised in Plymouth, and what guarantees from the bus company have we got that this will happen?
Okay, that's
you.
rather a lot in one. What I would, first of all, I would say that obviously the bus shelter contract or fixing is now coming to an end. It was never anticipated that in the development stage we would receive income from the bus shelters, because we're getting the information from the advertising that they're doing. So this year the answer is 0. Next year we go into a phased approach that we will have income. Obviously I don't really, because of the commerciality in the contract, it's very difficult for me to say exactly what we're getting, but there will be income that's generated from this contract that will be ploughed back into our public transport team. So it is good news.
So it's going to be ring-fenced.
So it will be ring-fenced for us, yes. The second part of your question was?
The electric bus.
Oh, yeah. Obviously, I'm just going to take the opportunity so people know that obviously the electric bus Zebra was a collective agreement between the Department for Transport, Plymouth City Council, Plymouth Go Ahead, or part of the Go Ahead group, and Cornwall. And ours was the smallest investment in that, but it's actually something that's really worthwhile in doing. There is going to be, at the moment, 50 electric buses. So we can be pedantic with the answer, because out of those 50 will be in Plymouth, but 7 of them, I think it's 7, will actually be on the 70, 70A and 70B, which all come into Plymouth. There is an agreement within the deal that these buses stay in Plymouth and stay on the 70. I'm using because that's Cornwall. So they will all be used and they can't be taken away without any agreement. So that guarantees them staying. And also what I think is worth remembering on this is that one of the things that we picked up from our bus panel is the age of the fleet. So as you know, City Bus run their Pride, as I call it, on the 21A, 21, those buses. And actually some of the other buses are older. So those older buses will be I presume they retire them to bus graveyards. But actually, what will happen is that the new buses will go on the secondary routes, so it will improve the average age of the fleet in Plymouth. And actually, you know, if we're honest, and I'm sure most parties in Plymouth support this agenda and support this, and I'm personally really proud that we've done it. And the last thing, because I've been criticised by certain people to say, is it right for us to spend money on it? The previous government set a load of hoops, obviously, that we have to go through. And I'm just going to read this paragraph because I think it will remind people. But I need to put my glasses on because I'm getting old. In accordance with the Subsidy Control Act of 2022, the subsidy, which is the funding from the Department for Transport, Plymouth City Council, Cornwall Council to City Bus Limited, with referred to the Subsidy Advice Unit, which is the SAU, which is part of the Competition and Markets Authority. The SAU have to evaluate the council's assessment of compliance of the proposed subsidy within the requirements set out in the above Act, and following a subsequent decision of the council to award the subsidy, it was published nationally on their website and says it is in compliance with full rules and regulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I'm really glad that they're going to be staying in Plymouth. The only reason I asked that question is because City Bus are nationwide, they're not just based in Plymouth. So what I didn't want is for us to invest and then go ahead, maybe use them up country somewhere.
No, they can't do that.
Can I, before I come to Tom, can I ask about the design, internal design? Because on the bus this morning coming in, you could see there wasn't enough room for enough pushchairs and wheelchairs on the current bus that I came in from Plymouth. Has that consideration been taken into the internal design of these buses for various needs?
I've not seen the design. There, obviously, at the moment, Councillor Stevens, there's quite a few local authorities and bus companies who have been successful in this. There is a fleet in London at the moment that go ahead operate, and these new buses will be the state of the art, and they will have learnt from the original design. So I am led to believe that these buses will take into account everyone's travelling needs. I don't know if you want to answer anything on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to jump in on this one as well, because you know the Zebra electric buses are a great example of an intervention from another department which is going to have a massive impact on emissions. We're here to talk about finance as well, so Paul, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on these numbers, but this has been slightly misrepresented by some. I think I'm right in saying this, that in terms of the council input to Zebra's 750 grand of external funding that we reallocated for this to unlock over £35 million of national and private investment. It's a drop in the ocean, the Plymouth City Council contribution to this, to do something that will have massive benefits for emissions reduction across the city, but also air quality. You think about some of the neighbourhoods that these buses are going through. You know, if you try and stand next to some of those older buses, it's disgusting what's coming out of the back of them. When we talk about air quality, it's not just a nice environmental thing. This makes a massive difference to people's health. You know, people with certain conditions, people who are older, will benefit hugely by having cleaner air on many of these bus routes. So thank you to Mark and Paul's team for making sure this goes ahead. Our Zebra allocation is one of the biggest in the country, so it's something we should be really excited about.
Paul, you want to come in?
Yeah, just to confirm that the contribution from the City Council is actually community infrastructure levy funding, so not technically City Council funding, but is the figure of 750,000, and the total project cost of the Zebra scheme is 31.87 million. So most of that investment, of course, is being made by the private sector through the Go Ahead Group. And I was speaking to them this morning, and they've confirmed that the orders for these buses are with the Chief Exec for signing today.
Good news. Look forward to seeing that parade coming through town there with the buses. And can I just check with the infrastructure at Mile House? Presumably that is covered by the cost that's been given towards the whole Zebra. Is included?
Yeah, that's correct.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to say my question to Councillor Tom Bryansdale, please. First of all, I'd like to say how pleased I am that in my ward we now have being put in at the moment electric vehicle charging point, which is a great asset to my ward moving forward and great in reducing the carbon footprint in my ward as well. So thank you. I'd like to talk about the cost of living crisis, please, in particular high energy bills. I'm just concerned for residents, really. What investment does PCC have lined up to support home retrofitting?
So I'll briefly come back on the first point as well. So electric vehicle charging kind of sits between both of us, doesn't it? So on Mark's side, it's the highway space and parking implications and that kind of aspect. But some of the funding is often linked up to net zero priorities and teams. Last year we published an electric vehicle charging strategy, which is a 10-year plan up to 2034, and that is looking to increase the number of EV charging points across the city in the hundreds. We know that this is something that is happening at pace. At the moment, Plymouth has slightly lower than average EV car ownership, but that's increasing. And we know that as we get to 2030, that number will be increasing significantly. And so as a city council, we just need to make sure we're giving residents that option. And teams have also looked at innovative approaches for terraces where you might not have a drive. And so there's an approach called Gull-E, Gully, which essentially reduces it down into the pavement, so it's not a trip hazard, and people can use their own electricity supply to do that, even if they don't have their own off-street parking. Second part of your question related to retrofitting and the cost of living. All of us, irrespective of what ward we're in, but some wards more than others, of course, I'm sure have heard from residents struggling with the skyrocketing cost of the energy crisis. And there are various ways that we as a local authority can try to support that. You'll see in the capital programme that there are 3 particular allocations that we have at the moment linked to that. One is the Eco Homes programme, which Paul will be in a stronger position to talk about, but essentially that's looking at new homes and making sure they're built to high environmental standards. There's also the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which is a national pot of money that we've been working with local suppliers of social homes so that we can really target the families and the individuals who are most vulnerable to the energy crisis and doing certain retrofitting measures that will bring down those bills. And we've also got some further allocation on the HUG2 programme. There's lots of acronyms, unfortunately, when it comes to retrofitting grants, which I've got to say isn't one of my favourite grants, but it's free money from the government, so thank you very much to the previous government. The reason I'm a bit critical of HUG2 is very restrictive in terms of the criteria of which households can benefit from it, to the point where I joined Plymouth Energy Community out on the doors trying to encourage households that are eligible for it to apply, but we've been trying to make sure we get that out as much as possible. We're also partnered with Plymouth Energy Community on energy advice and food poverty work as well, really trying to make sure people know cheap, affordable ways of saving money on their bills, and that's something we want to do more of going ahead. The new government has announced an exciting new retrofitting grant as part of their Warm Homes programme, so we're currently working out a bid to go into that. Our bid will be requesting for will be in the millions of pounds, and we're certainly hoping to help with hundreds more houses directly as a result of that grant. Thank you.
Thank you. Everything okay? Okay. Councillor Allison, please.
Thank you. I've got another one for Councillor Blaisdell. I was looking through the capital expenditure. There's a lot of money going into the National Marine Park, but over the next 5 years specifically, there's nearly £1 million going into species and habitat. Can you let us know what that actually refers to? What projects are we?
Sure. I should probably express an interest that I sit on the National Marine Park Horizons Board, and there are so many exciting projects associated with this, and to the point where it's hard to be specific in the actual capital programme itself. So I think the bit you're referring to is the Nature Boost programme, which is essentially £1 million over the 5 years that we have there. The most recent project linked up to that is to do with rays and skates. So Tudor and I had the nice opportunity to go to the Marine Biological Association on the Hoe. If you haven't been, I would recommend it. It's a building that lots of us have walked or driven past, but a lot of people haven't been in. But essentially, they're doing a project there where they're hatching new rays and documenting it, and it's something that hasn't particularly been done before. We've got some amazing video footage, and some of you might have seen before Christmas, there was a bit of a social media campaign about naming the rays, and some quite funny examples came from that. There are various other projects to do habitats as well, which starts to get into some quite scientific terminology, intertidal mudflats, biogenic reefs. Sometimes I think I understand it and then I have to do a bit of Googling. But there's other species as well that we're hoping to support. Some of you might have heard of the Alice shad, the only fish species that is exclusively born in the Tamar River. It's not born anywhere else. In terms of the understanding of the scientific community, and so we want to do some work to protect and also to publicise that species, and also one that I think will be popular with the general public. We're doing some work on seahorses as well, really exciting species that we have very few of in Plymouth Sound at the moment, and we want to look at what we can do to help them thrive, particularly in our seagrass habitat as well. So it's a great example of linking up with some of the work we're doing elsewhere in environmental planning.
Thank you. And next, Councillor Freeman, please.
Me again. I have a question for Councillor Coker, please, regarding the buses. So obviously we had COVID and we had a lockdown, and so bus transport user numbers rapidly decreased and fell off the edge. How are we now recovering from that with regards to usage of our bus services?
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. It's been one of that particular subject has been a hobby horse for me ever since COVID. You know, in recognition of the last government and the current government, with keeping fare caps, has certainly given the travelling public more of an incentive to use public transport. In 21-22, we had 12,481,000 journeys on our network. And 23-24, because I haven't got 24-25's figures, that had rose to 15,556. So it has increased substantially. I think what we're planning to do with bus routes in the next 12 months will have another effect on that. What still worries me, and it's some work that we're doing with my colleague in adult social care, is that the amount of journeys taken by concessionary fare passengers, so those that have got a free bus pass, actually fell during COVID to around 20% usage of what it was pre-pandemic levels. It rose slowly over the last 3 years, but it has hit a plateau of around 60-65%. So that means there are approximately 30% of people that used to travel on buses that aren't anymore. And it's about making and reaching out, and our promotion team are doing a lot of work on talking to people, going to events, encouraging people to use the bus. So I'm pleased with where it's gone, but I think there's more that we need to do.
Councillor Ricketts, please.
Thank you, Chair. Question to Councillor Coker. Yeah, we've spoken about this before. I've asked questions in council. We've had scrutiny meetings with both grown-ups about it. We'll agree to disagree. I don't believe the public money should be going into private bus companies. You do. You put out your arguments for that. I worry it's too quick, and that the infrastructure's not there for 50 electric buses. I could see problems down the line with it, but we agree to disagree sometimes, okay? The other thing is I always look at consistency and how we're trying to get people on public transport when we as a council are not encouraging people to come into the workplace. We've got more of a work at home philosophy. As a big organisation, that's not helping. It's exacerbating issues with people using public transport in Plymouth. Just as another point, there was a recent headline about we are not filling potholes. We're the worst in the country for doing that. I don't know the details. I just wondered if you could shed some light on that. Thank you.
I'm sure, Councillor Ricketts, you're right. We will agree to disagree on that, but we will be grown up and agree to disagree in a polite manner, which we've always done. As for the have you seen the answer that we put on our website, Councillor Ricketts? Well, I read it to you. There has been some misleading interpretation of the Department for Transport's data about our roads and statistics do not reflect the true situation in Plymouth. We've done a lot of work over the last few years from my administration and the previous administration to improve our roads. While there is always more we can do, the proportion of our classified roads needing repair is relatively low compared to the national average. 2% for A roads in Plymouth compared to over 4% nationally. The statistics reflect a change in approach. We now carry out prep work in the early part of the year and then complete surface dressing in the summer, which is in the next financial year. We carried out 2,155 metres squared of pre-patching prep work, but could not include this in the returns to the DFT. This was caveated to the DFT, but not recognised in the report that they sent out. A total of 7.32 kilometres of surface dressing works were completed in 24-25 and 6.7 on our A roads. We have been trialling the velocity machine, which carries out permanent repairs. 2 machines over the last 2 years. We've done over 10,000 repairs to our roads. We actually contacted that national newspaper, Councillor Ricketts, and said we felt that was unfair because of the data that both DFT knew and we knew wouldn't be included. And for those authorities that are trying to be forward-thinking and try new measures are being penalised in a report. We have written, or I have written, along with our MPs, to the Secretary of State for Transport to say, could we amend the way that the reporting is done? and I think it was very unfair. But if you're going to take part of a report and not take the whole, then some authorities are going to suffer. So I hope that clarifies the situation. And I don't know if my head of highways wants to comment, but I think we are, I think I've given you an explanation.
Thank you, Mark. I would like to follow that on. We actually have engaged with DFT directly, and we do have local representation, and we're engaging in dialogue both with themselves and also the individual who commissioned a AI survey for the city. The figures came back, and it came back in a favourable manner, but the reporter chose to ignore the facts and write a damning story about the delivery we carry out. It affected the team, and we've made strong representation that this shouldn't really occur, and it was quite damaging, I believe.
Okay, thank you. I was obviously Cabinet Member for Highways. I know you do great work, and thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit confused just by that question with regards to what Paul said. So I just wonder if the money for the electric buses is kind of reserved from somewhere else or something. I'm not very good at finance, so you just have to bear with me. The questions are going to come from a place you wouldn't understand. But did I understand it correctly that this money isn't coming from it's not going to be a problem for us as a council in our finance, yes?
The community infrastructure levy is a charge that we can put on certain developments in the city, and they have to pay that levy. And so that funding actually comes from, by and large, private sources through the levy. So not city council funding.
Thank you very much.
Just on that point, I know what Paul's trying to say. My argument is it's a council budget, yeah, that could be spent on a range of different things, play parks, whatever, from planning applications. We agree to disagree. I believe money should be spent on play parks, schools, different things like that, rather than electric buses for private bus companies.
Okay, that's a personal opinion, which we've heard several times. From Cabinet members?
Chair, sorry, are you still carrying on this? You're not ending it, are you? Oh, that's okay.
No. Sorry.
We've got another 2 hours of questions.
Yes, that's just the first page of my list here of people who want to ask questions. No, it's not. Bill, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question that I believe is for Councillor Briers-Delph. Under the pressures and adjustments table, it mentions £425,000 for street services restructure. What would be the outcomes of this additional investment, and will it result in a loss of staff?
Thank you for the question. I said as part of my introduction about the historic cuts that street services have experienced under over a decade of austerity. And what we've tried to work on this year is to think more systemically about how we can really get in there and make some changes that will really make a difference. There's various priorities that we've focused on as part of that, one of which being health and safety. A lot of the work with street services is right there on the front line, next to busy roads or handling heavy machinery. We have a legal responsibility and a moral responsibility to be doing everything we can to look after them. And so that's one area that we're hoping to continue to improve. There's also going to be improvements around performance management as well. I'm sure you've all had emails in your time as ward councillors where you've had something come through the casework system and it said something's been completed, and then you've heard back from a resident saying it's not quite what I expected to happen. And we want to make sure that there is a bit more capacity for those team leaders so that they can be going through and checking the performance as part of that. some of it is adding in additional roles as well. So, you know, I've been quite vocal about the fact that I want us to continue to increase our recycling rate, but also to do stuff around reducing and reusing initiatives as well. And for quite a few years now, the council has not had recycling officers. And so part of the restructure is to start the recruitment for those, which I think will be really valuable. Be valuable for what we do around food waste and making sure people understand that transition. There'll be opportunities to go into schools and make sure we're informing the next generation to better handle their waste as well. So various changes that are being made, but I really welcome this additional sum of money. It can make a big difference to what we do on the ground. Philip, if you want to add any more about the detail.
Thank you, Councillor Bryansdale. I think you've covered it all there. But what I would say is that I am particularly grateful for the additional funding. It's needed for me to meet my statutory obligations as a provider of numerous services across the council. There'll be a net gain in the number of staff. So to answer your question specifically about whether there are going to be any redundancies, absolutely not. We will increase the number of staff, and there'll be opportunities for people to move sideways and upwards. So yeah, it's a process to go through. Obviously, I don't want to predetermine that, but it's a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, John. Councillor Freeman, please.
Right, sorry, busy writing notes. Question again for Councillor Bryansdale, please. So fleet decarbonisation. In the sheets that we have, there is £380,000 capital funding set aside for the new financial year. Is that actually sufficient for the fleet decarbonisation?
By 2030.
Right, thank you. And is additional funding required? And what information can you give us about that, please?
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. I think it's fair to say that fleet decarbonisation is one of the biggest challenges in the Net Zero Action Plan. The scale of investment needed is huge. We have about 230 vehicles as a local authority. We currently have about 70 that are electric, so approximately a third, slightly dodgy maths. And we want to continue to improve that. The majority of the 70 that are electric are smaller light vehicles, and so there's a lot more options in the market with that. Some of the heavier vehicles, there aren't sufficient options available when they're beginning to come out, but we need to make sure that they're going to be able to deliver the service that the residents need. There are also difficulties around the price point of some of them. So for some of the vehicles, it's double the price for an electric vehicle than it would have been if you were to buy a combustion vehicle before. So you mentioned there's nearly 400 grand for next year. We've got another 9 vehicles lined up that we want to buy as electric, which is, you know, is a positive story and is further along than some local authorities have got. But you're right that there's a very long way to go for us to have a wholly electric or decarbonised fleet. So we'll be continuing to look at other alternative fuels as part of that. I've got to celebrate the work that Martin has done on the fleet, to an officer level, very, very passionate about this area and very knowledgeable about the different options. He's commissioned a study by the Energy Saving Trust to look at our opportunities at Prince Rock to make sure we have the right infrastructure in place to continue to expand on this, but particularly for those heavy vehicles. But no, you're right that the 400-ish grand for next year will continue to up our number, but by itself, that figure won't be enough to decarbonise the whole fleet.
And follow up, Councillor Freeman?
It's sort of a follow-up. I meant to make a comment before I started. I'm sorry, so I hope you'll allow me this. Councillor Bryansdale, I did mean to say at the start of that, though, that I just wanted to applaud the work that the council is doing in partnership with Plymouth Energy Community. It's the support they have given to local residents has been absolutely amazing, and some of the outcomes and the physical changes that have been made have been really brilliant. So yeah, long may that continue.
Thank you. Okay, I've got no one else on the list apart from myself. so we'll be wrapping up soon. But this is a question to you, Tom. On pages 23 and 30 in the draft budget document, it mentions the annual commitment of an additional 250,000 to finance the borrowing costs for net zero projects. Can you expand on the purpose of that, please, and whether the benefits of that benefit the wider community across Plymouth?
So finance slightly changed the wording on that section. So what that refers to is the Climate Emergency Investment Fund, which is a phrase some of you will be more familiar about than how it's been worded in the papers. So in 2022, I think it was, the Climate Emergency Investment Fund was set up. And essentially the intention was to have a pot of money where we could solely prioritise investment in net zero infrastructure, and that would increase every year. So as has been pointed out already in this meeting, if you're borrowing, you need to have in the revenue budget that equivalent to service those costs. And so the idea was that each year the ratchet would increase by 250 grand so that you could do further capital investment from that. Frustratingly, from my perspective, the previous administration cut that somewhat 1 year. When we came back last year, we reinstated the ratchet, and this year we've increased it by another 250 grand. 250 grand doesn't seem like much in the scale of some of the things we're talking about, so just wanted to explain how that works there. So that 250 grand additional borrowing for next year will allow us roughly £2 million of capital projects, so a much bigger figure. If we link that up with match funding, there are various organisations that local authority has to put, front up a little bit of money, and then you can unlock a bigger pool, just like with Zebra, for instance. We have the opportunity to significantly increase that 2 million figure again. So you're potentially looking at several £1 million of investment from that 250 grand of borrowing costs. But there are various other things that we're doing in terms of finance beyond that mechanism. But that mechanism is important because it allows us to really focus on projects where there's massive decarbonisation benefits. Elsewhere, we're doing a big piece of work around kind of invest to save through energy efficiency as well. So if there are certain departments, whether it's the commercial estate, whether it's corporates, where we know they could be saving money on their bills within a few year return period, then we'll be encouraging and supporting them to do that beyond what is in the Climate Emergency Investment Fund, and there's a big piece of work on that. And as I said in my introduction, that's already saving the council £500,000 every single year from budgets because this investment has been put into retrofitting, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and so on.
Thank you. And looking at the investor save, the Chelsea Meadow solar panel project is listed. And obviously it's been shunted as we review capital programs, but is that time limited? Does that money have to be spent by the last year of the budget allocation for that? Or when will we see the first fruits of that project?
So I'm incredibly excited about the Chelsea Meadow solar farm. This is a hugely important project. I believe it's 13 megawatts of energy, which is massive in terms of community energy. And you were praising PEC earlier. So this is a joint venture that's been set up with Plymouth Energy Community, and their expertise has been really useful in that. But we also have that joint vision around the potential of community energy. In fact, it was something I was discussing in Westminster yesterday with the Minister for Climate and the Minister for Energy. The opportunity to make sure that our social values are at the heart of renewable energy. Renewable energy can be done at scale and very commercially, but there's also opportunities to make sure it benefits communities. So one of the things that we've been talking about with Chelsea Meadow is opportunities for any surplus money that comes in through that to be driven back into community and environmental projects. There's the community ownership opportunities as well, so that ordinary people can benefit directly from it and inform the process going ahead. At the moment, in terms of the sequencing of it, Councillor Stevens, we're still finalising the due diligence around the financial picture of it. It's quite difficult with a long-term renewable energy project because you're having to look at fluctuating energy markets and trying to do a forecast on that. So that work is happening at the moment. There's opportunities with the Labour's new National Wealth Fund to do some lower rate borrowing through that, and that's an opportunity that we're exploring. And again, I was discussing with ministers yesterday. This project by itself, you know, would mean that as a local authority, the majority of our energy comes from renewable sources. So, you know, really is a huge undertaking that we're taking very seriously. Paul or Jonathan, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you've covered everything. It's because of the fluctuation in energy prices and the due diligence that Councillor Brydesdale referred to, that we just need to make sure that we complete that due diligence, but it's not locked into a funding timeframe as such.
Thank you. Well, Mark. Okay, Tom. Can I thank? I said earlier on about the visibility of the work you do. I was walked throughout Marder Way this morning, and I don't know if it was the inner child in me seeing the diggers at play and so on, that sort of thing, on the lorries. But you know, that we've discussed in Marder Way at length. But to see something happening after a lot of work and a lot of processes, and knowing that you know, the planning that goes in for that and the development of it. Steve, you mentioned about playgrounds now, and the prospect of such a major play facility in the city centre for all people. There's a lot of excitement. Well, I feel it anyway, out of it, as the digger probably did for me. But there's a lot of excitement. What is, because a lot of work goes on in the preparing and the planning for it and so on, and the thinking behind it. But to see it on the horizon is quite something to look forward to and be proud of as a city for all that goes in on that, and the logistics of getting that up and running as well. Thank you. Tom, you wanted to mention something?
Yeah, just by way of closing remarks, you know, I said in the introduction about there being 500 staff in street services, and some of the delivery of it isn't necessarily the most glamorous thing in the world, but there are a lot of people working incredibly hard on the front line. It can be quite a stretched department, and they're doing absolutely everything they can to deliver to the satisfaction of residents and councillors. So I just wanted to recognise everyone who works in these departments and thank them for that. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there's nothing to say, I want to just close and thank you all for what you do. Thanks for your attendance today, and thank you for what you contributed into the City of Plymouth. Thank you, and thanks for the bus. Thank you. Take care. Have a good day.